Now let's do some CSS. Now I know what you might be thinking. CSS is for style. Well, the way we can use transitions and transforms and animations with CSS is taking it from one style to the next style. So a transition is a change from status A to status B, or style A to style B for a limited number of properties. With our CSS transitions, we can change things and set how long they are with duration, how they move through the duration using timing function, and when it starts with delay on all properties or just some. So to use a transition, you must select a time for the transition in seconds or milliseconds. So I'll show you this example in CodePen. So what's going to happen is I'll hover over it or roll over it, and this box will turn red, but this box will turn red over a 2-second period. So let's check that out. Here. So we have two boxes, one blue, or both blue. One instantly turns red when you hover over it. This one turns red over 2 seconds. So how do we do that? So here's our CodePen here. This is a website that you can use to try out code. I don't have any JavaScript here. So I'm going to use HTML and CSS. So demo is this one. Demo 2 is this one. They both have margin 10px, width 200 pixels, height 200 pixels, white text, padding of 5%, just a little bit. Both have a background color of blue, and they're floated left. So this is what it looks like. Remember our pseudo classes, we can hover over both of them and they'll turn red. But then demo 2, this one, has a transition of 2 seconds. Now this is shorthand. I left out the other properties, but all I need to tell the browser is that when you hover over demo 2, it'll change color from blue to red over 2 seconds, like this. Notice that when I take it off of the box, the pointer, it transitions again. Timing function. So default is linear. That is to say, it changes evenly over time. Or you can make other combinations like you want it to ease in, so slowly start, or ease out where it starts out normal and then slows down. You can do like Bezier curves and things like that. So let's look at that CodePen. So here, I extended it to 5 seconds. And here I wrote it all out. So transition property, we're transitioning the background color. We're doing it over 5 seconds. We're doing a timing function of ease out. So it's going to start out linear and then slow down. And then transition delay, 2 seconds. So after 2 seconds, it'll start to go. So again, first one, quick change, hover, no transition to it. This one, 1, 2, and then it starts to change color and then slowly end. Notice I also have changed the text from white to black. There's no transition on that color change of the text. So if you notice, no transition on the color of your text here. And then slowly the color changes back from red to blue. So that's timing function. Now there's all sorts of timing functions we can do. We can do cubic Bezier kinds of curves. So if I wanted to have some kind of movement that does like this, See how those change. So if I click go, they'll move in this kind of direction. So this is what I have here, and this is compared to linear. So you can see the difference. Linear will be the bottom here in teal. This one will be in magenta. I click go, let's see what that looks like. So it was much faster in the beginning, and then it slowed down at the end. The linear moves at an even pace through the entire second. So that's cubic Bezier. You can copy this entire thing and put it into your code if you say doing that. You can drop it into timing function here, and that's how you could get different timing functions. Delay, we saw in our previous example, we set it to a 2-second delay. So let's go back to our code pen. Here's a delay of 2 seconds. Now, we can't have a delay unless we set a duration. So if you want to have some kind of delay, you have to set the duration first. So in our case, 2 seconds, and then it'll transition over 5 seconds. 1, 2, then it starts, and then it finishes. And then we take our pointer off, 2 seconds, then it starts to change. And that's delay. So instead of writing all it out like we saw here, you can do shorthand here. So in this case, the property is background, the duration is 1 second, the timing function is linear, and the delay is 500 milliseconds. So you can use seconds or milliseconds in your code. So let's add one to our example site. Go back to our code here. So we'll need to just reference our example site for a second. So let's say we want to change this instead of staying blue. Maybe we want to change it to orange in a transition. So in our code, we can go to our CSS and we'll scroll back to our hover, a hover. So we want this to change color. So instead of color blue, we'll make color, whoops, orange, whoops. And then what we need to do is go up to our A here and start to type out our transition. Let's just use a shorthand. Let's call it 2 seconds. Let's say we'll have a duration of 2 seconds. And if we save this, go back to our browser, 3, 2, 1, refresh. And then if we hover over, it should turn orange over 2 seconds. And it worked. That's good. Scroll back up, try it on our navigation, 3, 2, 1, yeah, and it gets turned from white to orange. So either blue to orange or white to orange. So that's a successful transition. Just to recap what we did. On hover, we wanted the color to go orange. And then back in our A, in the original A code, we want a transition of 2 seconds. Now, this is the same as transition duration 2 seconds or 200 milliseconds. Same thing. Now let's get into transforms. With transforms, you can change how things are on your site. So there are many different options for transforms. One of them is translate. So translate means to move something. So translate X means to move an element on the horizontal axis. So in this example, translate X 40 pixels means move 40 pixels to the right or the positive X direction. So here's the example. Here's the original position. Translated 40 pixels in the X direction means it moves over 40 pixels. Translate Y moves the element on the vertical axis. So in this case, 20 pixels in the y-axis. Now, something to keep in mind, this is very tricky, is that translate y 20 pixels moves it down instead of up. So make sure you remember that positive values go down and negative values go up. You can also scale, skew, matrix, rotate, and perspective. So let's look at a few of these in CodePen. So again, here are two demo boxes, two blue boxes. The second one, we've applied a rotate 45 degrees on it. So that's fun. All you need to do is transform and then rotate, and then in parentheses, some number. So 45 degrees here goes here. So that's pretty easy. Now we have scale. So to write scale, this is the shorthand version, but scale and in parentheses, some scale factor in the x direction and some scale factor in the y direction. So here it's half, 0.5 and 0.5 means half. So I've scaled it 50% in both directions. And so here's the original and here's demo 2 now. Scale 5, 5 or 0.5, 0.5. Same thing as transform scale x 5.5 and transform scale y 0.5. So either you write it longhand or shorthand, and you get this scaling factor, scaling result here. This is skew. So, and I have demo 3 now. So demo 2 is skewed 25 degrees in both the x and y directions. So here's the result of skewing in 2 different directions. And then demo 3 is skewed negative 25 degrees. So you get this nice slant here. So if you ever wanted to skew your divs, you can do it this way. Notice the text also skews with it. So that's kind of fun. Now we can do translate, which I showed you in the presentation. So demo 2 is translated 50 pixels in the y direction, so down this way. Demo 3 is translated 50 pixels in the x direction. So it started here, goes over here. The demo 4, interestingly, has both translate x and translate y, but only the y direction works. So if I wanted to move both of them, here's how I would do it. Instead of writing it like this, I can write it like this. Transform, translate x. Oops. 50 pixels, translate y, 50 pixels. And now it's moved in both directions. This last example, demo 2, has been transformed and rotated in the 3D dimensions. So 100% rotated, 100% rotated, 100% rotated, and then rotated 90 degrees. I've never actually done this before, but it is available for you to use if you wanted to get really crazy. And all of these, you can use CSS reference to do. So if you ever wanted to know how to transform, transition, all that stuff is here. Let's do a transform on our own site. On our site, we can use the transform property to maybe make this bigger or smaller without going to the CSS of font size. So we go to our code. Remember, this is an I tag for this handicap symbol. If we go to our CSS, back to our I tag here, we can do transform scale X with 50 pixels, or no, let's do scale 2 in the X direction, 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now we've scaled it in double in the X direction. So it's a little bit distorted. My next instinct is to do transform scale Y, also in direction 2, double in the Y direction. So 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now it only scales it in the Y direction. It took away the scaling in the X direction. So how do we fix this? There's 2 ways to fix it. One way is to get rid of this here and place it in the actual first line. So save this, refresh, 3, 2, 1, refresh, and now it's scaled in both the X and Y directions, and now it's properly oriented, it's not distorted. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to combine them into one, like so. Scale 2 and 2, save this, 3, 2, 1, refresh, and it's the same here. So either scale 2, 2 in parentheses, or scale X 2 and then a space, and then scale Y 2 to get both of them in there. So that's transform. Now we can do animation. So animating properties like color and position, it's similar to transition, but the difference is that animation is automatic. That's to say, it shows up on the page load. Transition requires user action. So if you remember, we had to hover over links in order for them to change. This way, the animation is automatic change. So animation uses keyframes, so @ keyframes, and it takes from a concept from old school animation. So back in the day before there were computers, the master animator or the lead animator would draw something called a keyframe. So the major points of action for our character. So here's Captain Hook from Peter Pan. The keyframes are this one here, and this one here. And then the in-between motions, the junior animators or the assistants would draw these intermediate steps, also known as tweens. So for our web design, we can set the keyframes, and then the computer or the browser will do the tweens. So instead of having us to define each little step, the computer will do the math for you. So let's look at an example in CodePen. So we have our blue box, and our blue box moves, bounces back and forth. So how does this work? Let me just move this over here. So I've written it in shorthand here and the keyframe part here. So let's break this down. There's 2 parts to an animation. The keyframes, so add keyframes, and then this is the name of the animation. So you assign this name when you write it up. We'll write it up here, but we'll call this movement. And then we tell it what the keyframes are. So at the keyframe of 0, so at the beginning, we want to translate it nothing. So we don't want anything to happen in the beginning. So it starts from its home position, which is 0, 0. That's the origin. And then at 100%, it's back to 0. So it starts and ends in the same spot. At halfway, we have a translate of 400 pixels. So it moves from 0 halfway to 400 pixels and then back again. So as you see, our thing is moving back and forth. 0, 0, 50, 400 pixels to the right, and then 100% at the end, back to 0. So these are the keyframes. And the name of our animation, we've called it movement. And I wrote it here in shorthand. We'll write this in our example website longhand, but just to sum up what I have here in shorthand, here is the animation name. Here's the animation duration. Here is something called iteration count. No, is that right? Here's something called animation direction. Here's animation iteration count. And then here's animation timing function. And here's animation delay. So let's do this in our website. Let's look at another example. So in this animation, it does two things at once. It bounces back and forth, and it also changes color. So how do we do that? We can do multiple animations. So in our keyframes, we have at 0 and 100%, we have movement. So this is the same as before, except this time it's 500 pixels. So at 0 and at the end, so start and end, we're at our origin position. At 50%, it's translated 500 pixels. So 0, 0, halfway, and then full time stops and goes to the end. And then for the color change part of it, this is an animation called color change. At 0, it's blue. Halfway, it turns green. And then at the end, it's blue again. So we can do two animations at once or multiple animations at once. And in our CSS for the demo box, demo div, here's a total shorthand, animation name, movement, 5-second duration. Animation direction is alternate, so it goes back and forth. Infinite, so our iteration count, it just keeps going. Our animation timing function, it moves slow and then picks up speed, and then it delays 2 seconds. And then comma, and then our whole animation for the color change part. So it's called color change, 5-second duration, animation direction is alternate, so it goes back and forth, and then it keeps going using animation iteration count, and then our animation timing function is ease in, and then our delay is 2 seconds. So this is a lot of stuff, but let's do one in our website. Now it's not required for your final project, but let's do one anyway. So in your code for this week, I've included a picture of Batman, and we'll have Batman move across the screen using an animation. So just to reorient you, bring you back to the example website, we'll stick it in between our about div and then the projects. So back to our code, in between our about divs and projects, I will make img source img Batman, excuse me, PNG. We'll use a class for this so we can do some stuff in CSS. So again, image source equals our path to our Batman file, and then a class on this image called animate. It's going to do some animation. So if we get back to our browser, 3, 2, 1, refresh, and here's Batman, and then we're going to do some animation to move him off the screen. So now that we have this together, we can go to our CSS and make him do stuff. So I'll just do it from here. So the first thing we need to do is set our keyframe. And then we'll have to call this some name. So I'll just call it Bat. We'll fill in the rest of it in a second. And so at 0%, I want it to translate. No, transform. Translate 0, 0. So at the beginning, it starts at 0. And then at 100%, so at the end of the animation, I want to transform, translate. I want it to go off the page. So it looks like he's flying away or running away. So I'll give it 2000 pixels and then 0. Can't forget my semicolons. So I've established a keyframe for animation name Bat, which we'll write in later in a second. At 0%, I want it to be at 0, starting position. And at the end of the animation, I want it to be 200 pixels to the right and probably off the page. So next, I'm going to do my animation. So animate, because that was the class I used in my HTML. And then animation name is Bat. And then we need an animation duration. So let's do this over 5 seconds. And we need an animation timing function. Let's do this linear. So you can either type out linear or leave it out because linear is the default. So let's just leave it out. Animation direction. Now, my previous examples were alternating, so they bounce back and forth. We don't want that exactly. So the default is normal. You don't have to put it in there, but let's just leave it in there. Animation iteration count. Now, we can have it infinite, so it keeps looping, but I think I'll just do with 1. So it only does, it only does its thing once. And then animation delay. Let's do 2 seconds. We've been working with 2 seconds. Let's just go with that. So I'll save this. To sum up, we have keyframes for Bat animation. At starting 0, it's in the origin position, 0, 0, hasn't gone anywhere. At the end of it, it transforms, translate 200 pixels to the right, which is probably off the screen. So let's see what this looks like. Back to our browser, 3, 2, 1, refresh, 1, 2, and Batman should move. And he did it. And then Batman reappears. So we can add some more CSS so that he stays off the page. But once the animation was finished, it came back just naturally to the home position. So if I want to make sure he stays off the page, I can add one more thing. Animation fill mode. And so if I do forward, then that means that at the end of the animation, it stays at the end of the animation. It doesn't come back. So if I save this, refresh, 3, 2, 1, refresh, 1, 2, Batman goes bye-bye, and Batman doesn't return because we used animation fill mode. So that's an animation. 1, 2, Batman leaves, and that's the end of the animation.